It's the 30th of June, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The remnants of the Galactic Federation attack Earth as they were part of the simulation. Their very existence depends on the preservation of the simulation for their survival. You have heard about global martial law. Did you know there is also a galactic martial law? Even an omniversal martial law. Gloves came off over the weekend as Marduk even declared war against me from beyond the grave. Battleground Earth fully activated for a short time, but it was shut down as quickly as it began. Here's how the shadow military of the ACIO got its power. The secret space program operative go rounds with the machine. At 1 a.m. my time today, the SSP tried to claim I was their asset, and that couldn't be further from the truth, and here's why. Well, it's been a minute since we've done a report, so I just first of all wanted to apologize to you. I did tell you I would get the report out on Saturday, but it's been an extremely busy and difficult weekend. And for those of you that are really sensitive to changes, you've probably felt those changes over the weekend. So I apologize to you for not getting this report out sooner. So I'm sorry about that. I just sometimes, you're in the heat of the battle mode and trying to clear things before they actually hit us. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 days. So hopefully, sleep is on the way soon. One can hope. Today wasn't that day, but you never know. Maybe tonight will be better. So I want to kick this report off with a bit of regular news. And the reason why I want to is just because, I know it's kind of irrelevant in the big picture of things, but a lot of people focus on these things, so I'm going to tell you about it. So recently, in the last 48 hours, I think it was, the big, beautiful bill is now with the House. And the House, or others there in the House and Senate, have been told to kick the can down the road until the 4th of July. The 4th of July is being reported as a really big day, and big things are going to happen, and big money is going to happen, and they will have total control by this day, and really, it has to do with other things that would normally happen on this day. And number one, the 4th of July is depicted in a number of movies, as well as, if you remember some of these days that aliens attack Earth. I think it's the movie 2012. There's another one with Will Smith, can't remember. And they all happen around the 4th of July. So it's just interesting from my standpoint, based on everything that has been going on, that 4th of July is such a big day. I know for Americans, it's Independence Day, which is not independence. It's probably Codependence Day, I guess we could call it. But for the rest of the world, why is it so important? Well, it's also the day that I was told way, way back in the day when I was talking to Marduk constantly. He told me that the 4th of July is the day that the budget is supposed to come out. Now, that budget has something to do, I guess you would say, with the U.S. government, but it has to do with every single government everywhere in the world. On that day, the last time I did it, back in 2012, there were other countries. Russia was involved, Saudis were involved, the UK was involved, China was involved. There were many, many different assignments that were supposed to happen on that day in agencies that you've never heard of. And I don't mean intelligence agencies just per se. I mean, global military orders. And at least at that time, I had never heard of these organizations, and I didn't really understand who they were and why I'm assigning money to these people. But at the time, I was told another lie, which was that, you're my trustee and all of these things by Marduk, which was couldn't be further from the truth, you see, because Marduk had lost the Alpha system in his access to it at that point in time. Now, on the 4th of July, 2012, I actually did assign one of these global budgets, and it was a 10-year budget that brought us to 2022, in which case they then did have a 10-year extension. That money was spent long before 2022. They were very unhappy and upset about that, and they've been trying to get me to do more ever since. Well, that's not going to happen. Now, I adhered to the fact that I unknowingly gave them a 10-year extension. What I mean by that is, well, it didn't feel right when I was doing it, and I thought it didn't feel right because I thought it was odd that I'm assigning trillions of dollars to the CIA. That felt very uncomfortable to me. But it was only really from the standpoint, at least I thought at the time, oh my God, I hope this is real and I hope this is right, because if it's not right, then, I'm going to be in serious trouble here. I sign money to the treasuries of the world, including the U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, you name it, the federal banking system, and all was right with the world with these people because nobody had gotten anything since 2007. So I started scratching my head at the time, and I'm like, this doesn't sound right. But I did it anyway because I thought I was doing my quote-unquote job. Come to find out later that was not the case. Everybody else claimed this money, that they were responsible for bringing it in. So there's some kind of correlation between the 4th of July, what we're seeing happening now, which didn't happen any other 4th of July, by the way, in the last decade, that I know of, for sure. So this is something new. As far as the budget money, every year this time, everybody keeps asking me, behind the scenes when I first got here, and, many calls later, from various organizations all asking for money on this day, but I haven't done it since. And so that was the first and only and last time there was ever any kind of global budget. Are they going to receive a ridiculous amount of money on the 4th of July? No, they are not. Do they believe there might be a hope this time versus any other time? I would guess. Omniversal simulations are an interesting thing. And we'll talk about that more in a minute here. But nonetheless, this big, beautiful bill is going to scuffle around, until the 4th of July, in which case by the 4th of July, it's going to scuffle around some more because there'll be nothing and no money coming out for this bill or any other bill. Now, this bill contains a lot of things that you would probably not like if you were an American citizen and a taxpayer. I'm sure if you were in other countries within the Middle East and you were in Eastern Europe, you would probably also not like this bill because that would mean that you would be in the middle of a war, a very hot and heavy war. They believe that this big, beautiful bill is going to pay for World War III to get the humans back in line, to get us to accept things like, agenda. Well, now it's 2025, I guess, 2030, the whole ID, you got to get microchipped, all of these kinds of things in order to exist on this planet, or you cease to exist on this planet. So there is a lot more behind this beautiful bill, which is kind of why I bring it up, but that's what you can expect to see regarding that. So the rest of it is all noise. They are trying to make Vance look like he's the hero, like he got them to pass it. He gave the final vote. And this just has to do with the agenda of the SSP, or Secret Space Program operatives. Because you see, they know they're touting around a fake orange man in the White House, and it's only a matter of time before they'd like to get rid of the fake orange man agenda and put together a president that's breathing, and I guess that would be Vance for a time. And remember, Vance has been promised a lot of positions himself, and I'm sure one of them is being upright if he continues to do this job. So if that were to happen, you would see the face front, probably some kind of martyr assassination sort of thing of Trump, like JFK style, I should say, not Junior. And, the world would mourn and blah, 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 and here you go. And now you got Vance. So I don't know, it's with these political operatives, they know politics. They know how to take over countries. This is what they believe they know how to do. They forget that there's a hidden hand, and always has been a hidden hand behind the scenes, pushing things along and making things happen and pushing the final buttons. I am fully well aware of what has been happening in Iran and Iraq and in the Middle East and Israel and all this Netanyahu show and all of these things. But the bottom line is really the political operatives do what political operatives do. Political operatives believe that they orchestrate coups. They also believe they orchestrate the financial downfall of countries. They also believe that they win wars. They start a war, start a plague, it all goes in a cookie cutter fashion that has been designed for them like actors in a movie. It's a script. Here's how you take over a country 101. And this is what they are pursuing in the Middle East right now. They believe, and they were supposed to, the last time they were supposed to get a hold of some money, that they were going to announce that Khomeini was dead, and then they were going to insert their new Pope, Islamic Pope guy known as the Imam. Obviously, there's nobody announced dead. They're still playing it up a lot in the media. There's a lot of chatter behind the scenes, in other news channels in let's just say within the Middle East and social media channels, that he's very ill. They don't know if he's going to make it. And this is all in preparation for their big alleged win that's going to happen on the 4th of July, which won't actually happen. So they'll go another round and round and round. And believe you me, guys, I have to tell you, there has been a lot of missing people of their caliber, let's just say, on this planet in the last few days. And I do have a better understanding of why they're like cockroaches. You stomp out one and 12 come out from underneath the kitchen cabinet. So I totally understand how you feel. I definitely know how I feel because, I've borne the brunt of it now for about a week and a half. So a little over 10 days. So many different things have happened in attempts with myself. So some of those people have come into this town, as I told you, and, began trying to do odd things to my person to make me extremely uncomfortable so that they could run me around, I guess, like a puppet or replicate me or do something of that nature. I don't know what their plan was. Power a new system of Marduks, something like that. And there was definite participation from people. Let me put it that way to you. There has been further attempts. It has been continuous for the last week, where there's a lot of frequencies, a lot of psyops, and I hunt them down like a dog. They die. Then there's more that come along. There's a new base, there's a new base, and there's a new base. So I'm gaining a better understanding of where these bases are coming from, because you blow up one and then there's another, and then you blow up another and then there's another, and Marduk was, let's just say he was a very smart being, as you know. He spent a lot of time with me. He spent a lot of time learning me and how I think and what I do. He spent time when I was in Russia, stealing my essence, created some fake Kims here on Earth, also created Kims elsewhere in the universe that, so almost in some cases you could say it's like fighting another version of yourself. You think everybody gets the information all at the same time, and then, they are set up to counteract you. It's like, if they created millions, if not billions, of cyborg Kims with a consciousness that was connected to my consciousness, but in fact programmed to do the exact opposite. So if I say, I'm going to jump over the fence, all of these cyborgs start reacting immediately and make the fence higher, or make the fence a giant wall, make it the size of the wall of China, that kind of thing, so that I can't jump over the fence. So in some ways, it's been an interesting week, frustrating, but very interesting. Another thing that's happened with these crazy people, and sometimes it's crazy people and sometimes it's a machine. As I had told you in the last report that I did, that AIs are not just chatbot GPTs and things they're trying to get the government to connect to. And, that's another thing that's part of the big, beautiful bill. All the government departments must be on an AI. I don't think it's the AI they think it is, if they had their way, let's just say. But AIs do strange things to people, even organic people. And, there's been a lot of people around the world that are fighting weird behaviors, things that people don't normally do. And, as far as the deep state is concerned, they're fully run by something else. I know they think it's their own thoughts, but it's really not. There's a machine in there specifically for them. And we'll talk about that in a second. But another thing they did that was fun and exciting is sometime around 1 o'clock this morning, this, I guess you'd call it more regular news. They somehow, because I am in a town and they still claim that this is their zone, it's not their zone, at least not for the important registration purposes, that I am their asset. They are telling people, actually, that I am their asset. They have told other countries, and the reason for the delays of the reason why they're not getting paid is because I haven't finished what I need to do, and I won't do that until the 4th of July. And I'm sorry, if you are listening to this from one of those other countries or the NSA or anybody else they're trying to hold together here, well, they wait. That is pure baloney. I have never been an asset. I was invited to come to this town by an operative of Langley 5. I know exactly who this person is. This person was a member of the Umbrella Military Corporation. You would say that he was a highly trained operative. He was not a CIA agent. He was a contractor. He was an operative. He was trained in the same way as some of the others that I've talked to in my life. Therefore, I understood him. He was told to bring me here by a specific date because of something they saw in some Wayback Machine or Project Looking Glass or some machine like it, that if I was here by this day, then they would be successful in their whatever it was that they were doing. Well, until we pulled the plug, flipped the switch, and, created our own situation. But the invite that I got to be here was as a VIP guest. Now, a VIP guest of a zone is a person that is, you could say, under protection. You could say, other people that have been VIP guests here, Joe Walsh, singer, Christy Brinkley has been a VIP guest here. Clearly these people are not operatives. They are, you could say, involved with probably certain things, but there's a lot of people that have homes here for that reason. Also, there are many assets here. Now, an asset is a person that actually works for an agency. Now, that agency could be the ACIO and one of the 15 militaries. That person could be from, a CIA or something like that, or someone that has worked with them. Assets come in different ways, let's just say, to Durango. Sometimes it's for protection. Sometimes they do things in different places in the world, and they're then being hunted by their enemy, which is, unbeknownst to that enemy, also part of the same group. So, for example, say they were told to do something against the Colombian mafia, as an example. They could be brought here, but unbeknownst to the Colombian mafia, and that is hunting this particular person down, he was sent by the same people that set up the Colombian mafia. So, they're all part of the Order of the Black Sun, and everybody is running everybody around claiming that somebody did something to them that they were told to do, which they all do. Just like there is another person here I have, let's just say, met in brief a long time ago when I first got here, who was also told to go to a specific place in the Middle East. And there's a movie about this, and you'll have to look this up, about this particular person. And was told to get some people, that were in an embassy out of that particular embassy in the Middle East. And then, there was some things that happened in the movie with Canada and onward to the United States. So, I think the movie's probably a decade old or so these days. But anyway, this person was actually sent to this location so they would actually blow them up. Now, in order to make these people feel okay with being blown up, they would get these numbers on, in the past, a passbook. Otherwise, it would be some kind of a black card or a credit card, and there would be enormous numbers on these cards that every time that there was a job they did, they would get paid on this card. Allegedly, it was for tax purposes, but really it was for control. So this particular person would see their numbers, if you were allegedly almost blown up during an operation, hit with a ballistic missile or something like that, was fired by your colleagues, actually, from the same country. This guy was an American. He's actually been on Fox News and all this kind of stuff. So he's a quote unquote CIA expert on the news. So anyway, this particular person, received about $200 million for this alleged incident that he can't get his hands on because it was locked up in a card somewhere back in 2007. So it's just interesting how they play these people, and of course they'll blame me for these things, but, and in reality, at the time, a decade ago, I'm like, well, that's not right. You almost got blown up. You surely earned this money, so here, let me go ahead and, can you help me with this? I need a terminal, I need this, because at that time I hadn't yet set up the structure in order to transfer money out. So there was a whole thing you had to do. No one would actually help me do that, including the guy that wanted his money. No one would approach them, probably because they were told not to, and on top of that, they would also block me from transferring these people money at that time. This is several years ago now. So it's a game they play with their own people. It's a game that Marduk plays with them or played with them. It's a game that Enki and Enlil played with them. It's a game that Michael played with them. It's a game that Raphael and Daniel and, everybody played a game with the humans. And whether those humans are, if you originated from here, regardless of how many times you've left here and come back, let's just say that, you are human, and everything bleeds and everything dies. So I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, the point is that, there are structures meant to keep the humans going. And that includes humans of the order, operatives that are considered assets and otherwise. These are scams, schemes, whatever you want to call it. there's no different than the fact that they still get on those calls every time there's an alleged payday that doesn't actually happen. And a lot of them kind of smartened up and they don't get on the calls anymore because they're just like, call me if anybody gets paid. If anybody gets paid, I'll get on the call, because nobody cares anymore. Which is also the reason why the deep state is trying to recruit people badly. And I mean badly. Heads of state. Because remember, the Trump organization is a group of political operatives. That's who they are. They believe you conquer kingdoms and conquer the world by taking over countries. Therefore, you now own the citizens of that country, which couldn't be further from the truth when it comes to the actual thing that makes the systems tick. So they can collect countries all they want. They can take them all for all anybody on this level cares, because on this level, all we care about is the kingdom of source and the kingdom of earth. So, since they're kind of one and the same in reality, everything they do is just kind of a waste of time and air. And I know a lot of you send me all this political information and that kind of thing. And quite frankly, everybody's just playing a game. Everybody's robbing Peter to pay Paul at this point. I realize that people as billionaires in this world are giving money to other billionaires of this world and that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong. I mean, our version of broke and Bill Gates' version of broke are two different things. We might be down to our last $10 and someone comes up to you and asks if they can have $8, because they need gas in their car or something. And a lot of you would probably give it to them. Payday's only a couple days away. You might say to yourself, you need it more than I do, that kind of thing, because that's who humans are. But, down to your last dollar, $10 or peso or whatever it is where you are, British pound, is our version of broke. We've seen broke. I don't know about all of you, but I have seen it in my lifetime. Their version of broke is, well, I really don't want to sell the villa in France. If I have to, I will, but I don't want to. I've only got $1 billion in the bank. I don't feel safe and secure. Therefore I'm down to my last billion. Are they down a lot of money? Yes, they're all down a lot of money right now because they're paying for this insanity that's going on with the promise, just like Elon Musk, with the promise that on the 4th of July, everybody's going to be made whole. Now, this is just another day. This is no different than the last new moon, the solstice, and, you can go back a million alignments with Uranus, Saturn, the moon, this constellation, that constellation, and figure out how this is all going to work. But they still will give and give and give until you hit their threshold of the version of when they feel broke. And then they'll stop. Elon Musk, as an example, now he's got his own political party and all this crap. I don't know what it's called. The People's Party, somebody's party, birthday party. I don't know, but some kind of party is happening over there. And, he's trying to see if people will support him. Well, we all know the real story, thanks to Sonny and his babysitter, which was the first person to ever interview her. There are many others after that, but she was one of the first. But over the last couple of years, everybody had to interview her and see for themselves. So there are a few other interviews out there with other people that are on YouTube and other channels that wanted to get the information out. I'm sure those things will be scrubbed because now he's a member of the poo-poo party or whatever. But anyway, so I needed to make real clear at 1:45 a.m., which I had no one to call at that point in time, but I did make some calls. And, later on in the morning, obviously, But to remind people that I'm a VIP guest, I am not an operative. I do not run operations for you people. I never will run operations for you people. I am here because I was invited here. You told me to come here. Unbeknownst to me, once I got here, then I started figuring out the Langley 5 thing and, and the many layers and the Black Sun and, their agendas and why they brought me here. It all became real clear. But now, you're in it. So there's a choice you have to make. Do you stay as a VIP guest because I haven't done anything to wear out my welcome, let's just say. So at this point, I'm just here. I'm a VIP guest. Is it comfortable here? Well, about as comfortable as anywhere, I guess, at this point. Probably a little more so because, all of these people that don't like me that come here can't do anything because they're an asset. If I leave here, maybe, I don't know. But at some point in the near future, I will be out of Rocky Mountain Jail, so to speak, and off on my own again. And that time is going to be real soon. So I hope that makes the other assets that are mad at me, real happy because, yeah, that's going to happen in the near future. So other things that have happened, some specifically to me, which probably also affected some people in the area. I saw the crazy people at Pagosa Peak just a few days ago, where they were attempting to emanate enormous amounts of frequencies through this area to open a portal. I saw you. I did. You don't see me now. I'm sure you don't from where you're at, but at that time, that's where you were. So you were wanting to have a portal open here, which would actually have extended far beyond Pagosa Springs. You see, Durango's kind of in the middle between Pagosa Springs and Silverton, give or take, a few miles here or there. Dulce is also fairly close. It's on the way to Pagosa Springs. It's a small turnoff there. And you all know about Dulce being a deep underground military base and those types of things. So deep underground military bases. We need to talk about these a little bit today because there's a lot of misunderstanding of what a deep underground military base is and how they work. And we have, and been to many, many times, some of them, and yet they keep coming back. It's like Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia is a favorite location of the deep state and our military, which is 100% owned like a dog by the deep state. They do whatever the deep state says, Langley 5 and otherwise. They are a dog. So they are not, maybe they're even the tail of a dog because they do whatever those people tell them to do. Doesn't matter how many of them they kill and how many American citizens they kill, but it's the same not only here in America, it is the same in Russia. I know this for a fact. I can tell you with 100% certainty because I have been and seen one of those bases with my own eyeballs, standing on the ground, not remote viewing, not using skills. I stood there. I watched the people go in and out. It was very snowy at the time, and I know what is there. I also know what is in Crimea. I know that because I have been there. I also know about places in China, and I know that because I have been there. Indonesia, the same. Philippines, the same. That temple that everybody talks about, amongst the RV circles and the Philippine elders and blah, blah, blah. Well, they all go to the same hole in the grounds, let me say plural. Mount Denali here in the States. Los Angeles is another one underneath the entire state of Washington in the U.S. Oregon, Nevada. There's really no place on this earth, including the ocean, where there isn't a potential deep underground military base at any given moment in time. So with deep underground military bases, please understand they are now you see it, now you don't. Sometimes they exist elsewhere. Sometimes that same base can exist here. And all of this has to do with various simulations and overlays. Why does the deep state like their alignments so much? Well, they enjoy their alignments because what it does is it implements another overlay. Now, when you and I think of a simulation, we think of pilots that might go into this machine and learn how to drive or fly a plane, I should say, or a helicopter or something like that. That would be a simulation. We also now have virtual reality games where you put on these glasses and you can see a simulation. You're playing a tennis game. Maybe you're shooting people in a war, through one of these virtual reality games. But in the case of a simulation, simulations to you appear very real. It's almost like that little avatar you move around in that virtual reality actually is your reality. You are in a part and take a part of various simulations which can change with various planetary alignments, or could have. Also various periods of time. So when I said to you, gee, I'm really sick and tired of cleaning space junk, as an example. And then, I clean it all up, and then 2 days later, there's more space junk. A lot of this has to do with which overlay you're looking at. Now, when we were kids, you might remember, now this is when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I mean, kind of after those really smelly mimeograph machines, which we were so excited, by the way, to be able to go make the copies with, and till our hands were purple. You probably remember this from grade school if you're listening to this, or even after. But we moved on to other than the blackboard, and then, as we got a little bit older, at least in my generation, us Gen Xers, because Gen X rules, by the way. Now I don't want to call it X anymore. Let's call it our generation, a generation of some of you listening. So this, as we got a little older, maybe got into high school or middle school, we had these interesting looking projectors. Now, these were also used in, for example, the workplace at that time. And they would pull down a white screen, and there was a little box, and it had a light on the top, and they would put these cellophane papers on top of these boxes. And they would tell you, oh, this is, and sometimes they would draw on them, and here are the math problems you need to solve, or, as if we were in school, or it would be a presentation to a board if you were, in the workplace at that time. Then they could throw another piece of cellophane on top of that, on top of the other one that's already there, and there would be new markings that would tell more of the story or of the presentation. So if you're old enough, you remember these machines. They were from, the 80s, and we used them quite a bit until we came up with more sophisticated things that were available to us, because they were always available elsewhere. To other folks. So this is how we did our presentations and whatnot, back in those days. And simulations kind of look like that. So if you were to live, so to speak, in one of those pieces of cellophane paper or plastic, clear plastic, that they would put on top of the light, everything in your world looks real. That's where you are. That's where you live. For humans, it's a little bit different in Earth, in the sun and the moon, because you live in several of those pieces of paper all at the same time, or these cellophane pieces. Now, what happens when there's an alignment, or there's a specific date that they're promised something is going to happen, or whatever, another piece of cellophane comes and overlays our cellophane we know as Earth. And now you all of a sudden have things that are appearing, more writing that would appear that wasn't there before. And by writing, I mean, for example, an entire deep underground military base. But just poof, here it is. Because there now is another simulation within your simulation. And they would stack these things into infamy, not only as it relates to Earth, but also in the omniverse. And as the seas of time, and we're going to talk about this here, as the seas of time would change, meaning time is a creation, it is a current, it is basically the current of death. Time causes death and degeneration. But as the seas continue to turn, you start to see more and more overlays. You kind of pick them up. Like if you've ever been walking down a really windy street and all of a sudden a piece of paper or newspaper sticks to your face. Have you ever had that happen? And then all of a sudden all the rest of the newspaper keeps coming at you, and before you know it, you've got half the daily news stuck to your face, It's kind of like that. Just keeps layering and layering and layering and layering, and then all you see is the words on there. But you're a part of it instead of it actually just hitting you. So because we have been working feverishly to dismantle simulations, there are many different things that have happened during this time. So I want to kind of go into the reason why information on the internet is wrong as it relates to deep underground military bases. I'm also going to explain to you how they get here, when it happens, why it happens, who does it, and everything you need to know about a deep underground military base, laboratories, and all kinds of programs that we know to be harmful to humans and evil. And why they weren't here yesterday, but all of a sudden they're here today, or vice versa. Now, the deep state is currently chasing these simulations. Simulations, however, are somewhat limited at this point as to what they can and cannot do and how they can actually survive on this planet. So on that note, we are going to bring up the whiteboard so I can kind of explain to you a little bit further. And the only way I can think of to do that is in my scribbly writing. So, okay. So to you, say this is you, terrible writing. Okay, so this is you, and you're looking at a tree, and the tree, is, if it's spring where you're at, or the beginning of summer, as it is in the northern hemisphere, the tree to you looks whole, it looks lush, it's probably got the beginnings of fruit on the tree. If it's a fruit tree, the leaves are green, and you think, okay, well, it's summer, So automatically we begin to do all of the summer things. The weather changes. All of these types of things happen, in the beginning of summer. It starts to get warmer. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's starting to get colder. Well, what if I told you all of that is a simulation? It is merely an overlay on this planet. So a few months from now, if you're in the northern hemisphere, this tree is going to look a whole lot different. It's going to look like, the leaves are falling on the ground. They're turning orange, and brown and pretty colors. The weather changes where you're at. It's getting cooler now. And what if I told you that simulation changes every day? Every single day, there's a new layer that's put on you. Now, some of these are continuous simulations, such as aging. Each simulation communicates with the other simulation. So there are days, I'm sure, where you wake up and you think, boy, I look well rested today. Wow, that's great. Or, I'm 23 years old and I look great, that kind of thing. And other things also get implemented during these daily and yearly and seasonal and and varying alignments and all of this these are all simulations on your simulation. So the older you get, the more simulations you are present in. What feels like the present or the progression of quote unquote time to you is merely a simulation. That includes things that happen to your vessel. One day you're healthy and the next day you've got a cold, because in the next day simulation you have a virus. So it adds an overlay to your person. Now, your consciousness exists in the now, in the present, but it also exists in every single simulation simultaneously. Now, some people will say you create the world you live in. Well, not exactly. As you create within simulations, the simulation also creates to counteract you. So, in other words, you can go to the gym, you can work out, you can do all these anti-aging treatments and all of these things, but they don't last long. They might last for, 6 months or 7 months or whatever it is, and then you have to, or a year or two, and then you have to do the things again or whatever it is to change your person. Now, if you get, for example, an arm in one simulation, say your arm was cut off in the war and we have a time goes by, so to speak, and you receive a new arm because we have new technology that creates that arm for you. You will continue in the multiple simulations that you are in to have that new arm, but other things might happen to you as you move along in the simulation. So you exist in every single one. So as another layer is put on top of you, so to speak, it continuously is creating the new you constantly, whether that's an illness or a heart attack, or it could even be your environment. The seasons change. Seasons are artificial overlays on Earth. These are simulations. Now, there are many different simulations going on here on Earth at the same time, okay? Because this is about you. I do these reports for you. So you have an understanding of what the matrix really is or what a simulation really is. So you are an organic being. You've got this vessel, and in order for them to manipulate said vessel, they will keep inserting all these simulations on top of simulations, and they happen daily, hourly, seasonally. They happen monthly. They happen yearly. They happen every 1,008 years. There's a new one, and then there's one that happens every 2016 years. So you have what we call minor and major simulations that create the world that you live in. And by the world, we have Earth, sure, but your feet literally are not permitted to touch the ground. Believe it or not, you are levitating. You're not levitating. You're actually walking in a simulation. Simulations, when we all think of a simulation, we think of things like the virtual reality playing tennis game. But it's not. When it's an actual simulation of creation, in part by your own consciousness, because they say, you create who you are. If you think you're sick and tired, then you're sick and tired. And that's in part true, because your consciousness exists in the next minute, in the next day, in the next month, in the next year here on Earth. But each simulation that exists, each overlay that exists from the virtual 1980s, looking projector thing that I told you about, It looks like a box, and then, you had this little piece that comes out, and, this is where that projector would be, kind of thing. And then you would come in and you would put these pieces of cellophane on there, and then you would put another one on there and another one, and part of the reason why we age is because we have too many time simulations that we're living in. It's exhausting, to power all of these with your own consciousness and your own energy. Unfortunately, it's what we have had to deal with for a long period of time. So those days where you're kind of dragging, it probably means that there's another simulation being created. Now, you have simulation creators. So although the humans, can create a simulation to some degree, even the deep state, even the militaries, even in all those, people, they believe that they have the ability to manifest their destiny. And I've heard this from deep state people before. Whatever I say, I get. This is because we're the chosen ones. I have met hundreds of chosen ones over the years, and they're all chosen. And they all have the ability to create these things using this. This isn't what the machine looks like, but using this antiquated 1980s projector by overlaying these things. So do they have any more say in the creation of the simulation than you do? No, they don't. You create yours, they create theirs, and together we all live in this world of our own creation, believe it or not, with many, many simulators running at the same time. So, simulation creators are those that own the realm. Now, Earth, being unique, is in every realm. What I mean by that is Earth exists in every density. Matter of fact, the whole galaxy does. The whole galaxy exists in every density. Earth exists in every plane within you, every density within you. Planes make up densities. Earth also exists in subsections of planes, which were created for further control. And sections. And then you've got overlay worlds. So if we look like a giant layer cake, which we kind of do, because humans, we are existing in all these different places at the same time, mainly because of how the universe was constructed. So we have what we call doppelgangers. And doppelgangers of the galaxy, doppelgangers of Earth, doppelgangers of you, many, many, many doppelgangers of you, existing not only in these, as I described them, overlays, and here you are again, you're in this one, and here you are again, you're in this one. It's almost like when we were kids and you would create the stick figure that moves, on many, many sheets of paper, and you would just take your thumb and go flip, 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 and then they would look like they were running. Yeah, that's you. Every second of every day, every zeptosecond of every day. However, it'd be almost like if someone came in and drew something extra on that person, a hat, another 3 hands, 4 legs, whatever on the person. Simulator creators can do that if it serves their purpose. So simulator creators are like Marduk, Enki, Enlil, Lucifer, Lucerne, Artemis, the Red Queen, whatever you want to call her. Many, many simulator creators exist. There are ones that we know, your least favorite demons, Baal had his own frequency simulations, Belial, Michael, Michael could also create simulations. So you've got many different simulation creators creating based on the amount of simulation overlays that exist on this earth all at the same time. So sometimes when you see these things that come up in the news, you focus on those things in the news, and therefore it comes to be. It wasn't there yesterday, but now it's there. It's the whole reason for social media's existence. It's the whole reason why governments exist. It's the whole reason why mainstream media exists, because you do have a small part to play in the simulation of what happens next. Now, as it relates to the bigger picture of things, so now we know the players in the game. We know that there are many, many, thousands of simulation creators. Source does not create simulations. Source creates in the now. Even at the time when we had a dark portion of Source, he creates in both at the same time. So, and please forgive me when I say this, but there are many people that are like, oh, well, only the people can change it. Well, to some degree, how would the people actually override multiple simulations without being aware that said simulations exist? We have an audience here, sure. We have people, thousands, if not millions of them, that have no TV, that have no internet, that have no way of watching a report like this. So, well, how are we going to get 8 billion people to override a simulation? They don't understand it. They don't know it. And quite frankly, even a lot of people watching this report will probably watch it 2 or 3 times to better understand a simulation. It's pretty dastardly, actually. But Source Just Know does not create a simulation. Your connection to Source within your soul exists. So rather than trying to blast your way through simulation after simulation after simulation to get, quote unquote, through the many densities that you exist in to reach Source, which many people can do. I mean, it's just a little harder way to go, but you can actually reach within and reach directly out to Source, and you can experience it, the now in the reality. For some people, that's through meditation. For other people, it's through prayer. You have the ability to still make that connection anytime you want to, and Source can also make that soul connection to you as well. But most oftentimes, they keep us running on this simulator hamster wheel. Your jobs, they can affect, if they decide that you are only going to work in a certain job, until this day, they will create a thought process or a consciousness which will go into your boss's head and say, fire John Doe, fire Mary Doe. And then you'll get fired. You won't maybe even have done anything. It doesn't really matter because the simulation says you are now meant to leave that job. It keeps you on your toes, keeps you running on that hamster wheel, finding another job. Maybe they want you to go work somewhere else to do something else. So timelines. Okay, so now we understand at least a little bit better how simulations actually work. How you can still connect to Source regardless of which simulation you're in. It happens from the inside out. It's much easier than the outside, to reach out to Source like he's far away and we always look up like it's in heaven. And yes, Source would be considered up from here. Quite frankly, most everything has been up from here for a long time. Okay, timelines. This one's going to be a tough one to understand because now we know days are a simulation, months, simulation, weeks, years. millennia, centuries, etc., etc., etc. So now you understand days, weeks, months, years, millennia, centuries, and if necessary, those days can be broken down into hours by an overrider or a simulation creator. It can also be done in seconds, and so on and so forth. So just because the cookie cutter says every day you get a new simulation, every week, every month you get a new simulation, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's always going to be the case. Now, those can be sped up and slowed down. There's also specific overlays that will change any one of these, such as, astrologists would say Venus is conjunct Saturn on a specific day. Now, that's going to alter those days. It might even be months. It might even be weeks. Could be years. Saturn only comes around every 60 years or so. It doesn't mean it doesn't have many alignments in between, but you get the gist here. So you could get extra simulations on any given day if we're now in the time of Aquarius. So if we're now in the time of Aquarius, that might last for 2 months, 3 months. So you've got your day, month, week, year simulations that go on. Plus, now you've got extra fun and games because you're in alignment with Aquarius, or things our zodiac doesn't even recognize, Andromeda, Proxima Centauri, Alpha Draconis, you name it. We can have all kinds of overlays at any given moment in time. Timelines. We're taught on the internet that timelines per se, I prefer to call them time simulations rather than lines, because the way we saw, at least I saw, timelines before now was that, okay, so there's a simulation that appears on Earth. I saw it as an overlay. An overlay appears on Earth, and we are going to live in this way because we were born at this time or reincarnated here on Earth at this time. So we are going to live in this linear fashion, which creates a timeline. Now, let me kind of draw this out for you. Okay, so if this were Earth, and it is Earth, you are here. Just kidding. So timelines, days might look to you like, let's say this day is being dictated from this particular location. So believe it or not, this is a very skinny cone, which is kind of representing a day, sort of thing. Now, you'll have many of these, of course, because time marches on and you're being overlaid and overlaid and overlaid over and over and over again. Now, a timeline might look like this. It consists of multiple days, just as years consist of multiple days. And that timeline will continue. Now, at any given moment in time, the timeline, quote unquote, creator can change the timeline. So you might have a longer projection of a time line, so to speak, than you would have of a day. Now, this is the creation of time on Earth. Now, simulations. So now we understand how we age for no apparent reason whatsoever, because our vessels aren't actually meant to do that, how people get diseases, how they infect us with plagues, all of this, because these are like miniature timelines within a timeline, and they are created by a creator of the timeline. Now, even though, for example, say Michael created a timeline here on Earth, even though, because remember, there is no time, So if Michael created a timeline here on Earth, which could coexist with, say, a Marduk timeline, which could coexist with an Enki and an Enlil timeline, and ultimately a Lucifer timeline, all at the same time. So they would all coexist as multiple layers on your person. Boy, if you weren't exhausted before, you are now, because now you understand why you're tired. So there are even simulations that ran for daytime, and night time. Now, nighttime was especially beneficial because we have been programmed and altered to need, quote unquote, nighttime, which we sleep. So your daytime consciousness thought could be full of prayers, manifestations, hopes, and dreams, and all kinds of things being fed into, maybe 6 or 7. I mean, there could be thousands of timelines simultaneously. Now, this is where you're actually, your mind is more connected to your body, which is more connected to your soul, because you're now making a conscious effort to do this manifesting. Now, creator can override you, a timeline creator can override you in your consciousness. But at nighttime, they like nighttime because at nighttime, they used to be able to manipulate your consciousness more. So, you've probably noticed, if you're very sensitive over the last few months, the frequencies get louder at night. As the sun starts to go down, because your circadian rhythm sort of winds down. You've worked all day and now your mind is tired and you want to just watch some TV and go to sleep. So when you're sleeping, dreams, aren't necessarily your dreams. See, they can manipulate your dreams, and it's easier to manipulate you when you're asleep because very few people can control their dreams and realize it's not real. They wake up and go, oh my gosh, there's a dream. This is happening. But in the past, simulators and creators can interfere with the consciousness in your dreams and in nighttime. We're just becoming more and more aware of this because the simulations are not having the same effect. So as we used to have to work harder, for example, to get to source, your creator of your timeline must work harder to get you to create what it wants you to create simultaneously. Now you're going to say to me, well, Michael's not here. Marduk's not here. Oh, but wait. When a creator creates a timeline, could be a day, could be a month, could be a year. When a creator creates a timeline, there is no such thing as time. That is a pure and simple alignment and at a quote unquote time of its own creation as to when that simulation would be implemented. Now, Marduk would have times where there would be peace on Earth. Marduk would have times where there would be war on Earth. And a lot of this stuff was dictated by, let's just say Marduk in this case. Let's use Marduk. So Marduk created millions and millions and millions of timelines. Time doesn't exist in certain places. Excuse me. But what does exist is the movement of creation, the now. The now is constantly changing. And if we were all 100% connected to the now all the time, which it's impossible to do in this world, you wouldn't eat. You wouldn't go to the grocery store. You wouldn't watch your family grow up. You wouldn't see the different simulations overlaying your little humans, our kids and our grandkids. So the creator can actually create a consciousness. Of its own doing, which then is like programming a computer. So if you want your computer, or you want to play a computer, for example, in a video game, say you do, it's not you and a friend of yours playing a game, against each other on the computer, you decide nobody's around and I can't sleep and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm going to play the computer in this case. So technically, life is being played like you playing a computer. It's got a consciousness of its own. It's got programming of its own. But in quantum levels, consciousnesses program AI systems. So Marduk would use his consciousness, infuse it into a timeline, or now we know a better term for that, a simulation, a time simulation. And there you go. All these crazy things are going to all of a sudden start happening. Boom, 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 boom. Now, if you're the deep state, you might be aware of the Marduk consciousness timeline. You could also be aware that maybe Lucifer or Lucerne, which were the main simulator runners, are like, okay, look what Marduk just created outside of time. Okay, well, isn't that cool? Well, we're going to insert something else in here to save the humans. And simulation after simulation after simulation would fight against each other. And this is a war. So this is a war of simulations. And honestly, it's not really about you humans. You just become useful, for Marduk and for other consciousness creators because you are the enemy of a consciousness simulation. You are its enemy, and sometimes, as humans, we can be its friend. You see, the more we focus on things like war, the more we focus on things like watching the news and all of the terrible shootings, and then we analyze the shootings. Are they real or are they not real? Did it really happen? The questions oftentimes remain unanswered. They can't find the victim. They can't find the person. We hear about things like alien abductions. Do they actually exist? What actually is happening when a person disappears from a simulation? Were they more useful someplace else? Was it a glitch in the simulation? A glitch in the matrix? Did they just disappear? Well, their soul doesn't disappear, but sometimes the person can disappear. So now we understand war at the highest level, and now we understand simulations at the highest level. We understand that the creator doesn't create in a simulation. Simulations were created by those that fell, those that wanted to walk away from source, those that wanted to be source, therefore in charge of creation. Now, they can't create in the now. Simulations do not affect you in the now, which is how you protect yourself from crazy things that happen in the simulations. But you gotta, at some point, you gotta deal with the simulations, right? Well, technically, that's my job. So, Marduk, being Marduk, even created a simulation full of Kims that he could manipulate like a bunch of little voodoo dolls. And so he created specific Kims to exist in many places on the planet. He had done that in the deep state, not the deep state, because the deep state can't create a simulation. They have no capacity to do this in any way, shape, or form. You think they're doing things to you and they're not. Matter of fact, who knows how many of them are actually or even organic anymore? They could just be simulation overlays. They might exist within a simulation. So, for example, let's talk about how simulations affect us right now. And all the things we hear, and all the things we see, and all the things we do, because this is the important part. Okay. People. We know certain people have organically died, but yet they're still here and they're still on TV. They might not look quite the same because simulations aren't perfect. Sims. If they can't create, because see, sometimes things happen, because remember, simulations are created outside of time. And you never know when something outside of the norm is going to happen. So if you were a simulation creator that created in Earth's time something 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, or how about 100,000 years in the future, that can happen. You see, because it's a simulation. However, unexpected occurrences sometimes happen with the organic people living in an inorganic simulation. Sometimes the house isn't there anymore. Sometimes things actually do occur naturally and things disappear, and they're not necessarily a simulation issue. There are things that disrupt the simulation, which is why weird things happen. And now you've got a bunch of political people wearing a mask, as an example, because no one could reinsert them the next day, the last second, the next 3 days back into the simulation. There's a time frame for souls and, manipulation. And when our souls stop going to a place where the simulation could control them, the simulation we know as the false heaven, that's when the whole clone thing kind of started to fall apart. Because there's no bucket of souls. You can't just put someone right back here, even the quote-unquote chosen ones of the deep state. It just doesn't work out that way because there's no way for the simulation to affect what exists in the now at this time. Does that make sense? Now, what happens when a major simulation is about to occur? We have what is going on right now. This is why the deep state is chasing after it like kids in a candy store. I mean, unfreaking believable. So, because simulations are falling apart, it is more difficult to implement a new simulation. This is what the deep state fails to understand. When I told you, now you see it, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. That's because Marduk's consciousness is failing, as an example. Now, it's not just Marduk. It's Marduk's created simulations that run on consciousness of his. Okay, might be of Michael's, might be of somebody else's, who knows. But they create the realities that are trying desperately to overlay this planet. Now, Marduk, as I told you, this is important to understand, saw me as an enemy, saw me as someone he needed to control, which is why he spent all that time with me. Because he needed to understand how I work. And as I worked with him, he would actually register that thought. Oh, look, if I tell Kim, no money for you, she's going to do this. If I tell Kim, that, she can't do this or she can do that, or, oh, well, do you want that? Then he would program it into the upcoming simulations. Dastardly, isn't it? It's the same thing with the entire human race. They watch, they observe, and they create simulations in order to keep you a slave. Same goes for any organic members of the deep state. Congratulations, we're all in the same boat, swimming in the same damn river. So better put on your big boy and big girl panties, deep state people, because you are stuck the same way we are. Now, they used to have these escape routes. We're going to talk about that in a second, but they used to have these escape routes so they could leave and come back and leave and come back, because some people, like the SSP folks, are aware somewhat about simulations. They could leave the overlays of simulations for 100 years or 50 years or whatever, and then come back into the simulation. You ever wonder why some of them look exactly the same? Well, that's why, because they didn't actually die. They just left the simulations, the hundreds of them that exist here on the earth, and they go to a time of no time, or a nil, or sometimes they call it nowhere, everywhere, anywhere, whatever, but I call it a nil. A time of no time. Time of no time. So they go to one of these places, and that's where they hang out for a while. They still somewhat connected to the vessel that's here. Something ugly would come back in its place, play the part for all the simulations, and then, they'd be able to switch out. And that's why you ever wonder why we live to a certain age and the deep state, congratulations, here's your 110th birthday, and we don't get that. Well, part of the reason for that is because there's things like stasis, or you go into a nil, or, your soul comes out. You can do repairs. You can do all kinds of things in these various places. Why certain people look like they don't age, or whatever, it's all part of the simulation. There are rules to coming and going from a simulation, but a lot of them, especially the SSP, do not adhere to those rules. So they'll leave at the age of 21, come back 100 years later and still be 21 years old. Because remember, if you're outside a simulation, simulations equal age. These people go out for 100 years, doesn't matter. They're technically 121 years old, and then they come back, and here you go. That's why the archivist, said, oh yeah, I'm 161 years old, or whatever, they told Tom. Well, is that possible? Sure. Absolutely. Because you're not in the simulation every single day, all day. Sometimes you leave the simulation, sometimes you come back. Sometimes you can go forward or back. This is what's known as, in their world, as time travel. You hear about a few things on the internet. Oh my God, there's Putin in World War II, and look at him today, looks the same, blah, blah, blah. It's what they call time travel. Time travel is when you go back and forth between various simulations. You can spend time out of it in a nil for a while, but you go back and forth, and, and a lot of them, because they are aware, or they believe they're aware of an upcoming simulation, they will act accordingly. In other words, they will try to go into what they call safe zones or sophons, hoping that the simulation will pass. And they can stay in there long enough to let it pass. Sophons, are technically, in their world, you're actually going into another a nil. There's nil sophons, and then there's other simulations where it's like you skip over that song on an old 33 record and you go to 2 songs over. So you've skipped the part where everybody gets overlaid in a simulation with a virus. You know exactly what one we're talking about here. So yeah, all of us get sick, all of us have all these things, and it's being created more and more every day, but this is where simulations glitch. Because remember, this is how I played and learned how to play the simulation. So Marduk, I knew, and we knew, because it's written in books in 1984, that this was going to happen. People are getting a greater connection to source right now, whether they know it or they don't know it. They can choose to ignore it, or they can choose to pay attention to it and listen. But a lot more people are not believing the baloney they're being fed. Therefore, the consciousness that took place during a virus simulation, let's call it, was starting to override the consciousness of the creator. In this case, say it's Marduk. Now, because the consciousness of the light, remember I tell you, hold the love, hold the light, hold the love, hold the light, because the consciousness is overriding the simulation, and there's no being to create the simulation the next day. This is why it was so important to take out the realms, the kings, to not have those realms belong to those folks anymore, because they can no longer change or alter a currently running simulation. Therefore, you as human beings have more power now as a group. So the more of you that believe in one thing or another, the more you can change how the simulation is going to affect you. Pretty incredible, right? So that because the virus simulation, let's call it the virus simulation, is worldwide. It's happening everywhere. People know something is wrong. A lot of people started to realize something is wrong. You know, the toilet paper crisis, the orchestrated thing, truck drivers coming out and telling you that there's really no toilet paper shortage. Look at this warehouse. Then you got other people coming out and telling you there's no shortage of eggs. Look at all these eggs. They told me to just let them go bad because they didn't want them in the store. Now we have an egg shortage and the price goes up. They're having a very hard time maintaining the believability of what's really happening. Now, think about this because it's important for you to understand how these things work until they're completely gone. And we're probably more than 75% of the way there. That doesn't mean they don't exist anymore. Okay? So please, just bear with me. So Marduk and I eventually became not friends, obviously. There was a little bit of a falling out with him being in the simulation, and, you know, things happened on a different plane of existence, which then knocked him out of that realm and couldn't get past 4 anymore. Stuck around in other realms for a while, and then eventually I caught up to him. So, you know, Michael, same. Gabriel, Raphael, same. You know, Lucifer, Lucerne, same. And you've been hearing about this for the last several years. So now all you got is this crazy consciousness running. Because no one was there to adjust the consciousness of the following day, minute, month, whatever it is that you're in, we all started to figure it out. Something is wrong. You know, I know even at one point in time, we were discussing with Sunny about how to teach people something is wrong. Something is wrong. You know, this doesn't make any sense. Something is wrong. And it was meant for, you know, people who are just gaining an understanding. And that group of people are greater and greater and greater these days. You know, everybody's searching for information somewhere. And unfortunately, you know, 50 to 60% of it is being fed to you. In other words, you know, you got a whole patriot community convinced that they are patriots and they're fighting for America, and it couldn't be further from the truth. They are just holding the consciousness that this thing is going to continue, you know, the way that it's been continuing. People are waking up, though. People aren't believing in it, you know, aren't believing that this guy is the savior anymore. Therefore, they want to insert their next savior, Vance, who saved the big, beautiful bill. Now, will people believe in Vance for a little bit longer? I have no idea. Probably not, because it's going to be the same crap show, same different day. So, why does the SSP, Trump operatives, Order of the Dragon, Black Nobility believe that they are going to get paid on July 4th because somebody took notes in a Marduk simulation and said that's the day that the system is going to change hands. They also told them there's going to be a battle on Earth. And you'll have more equipment and more help during this battle to fight for your side. And you will be victorious in this battle, and we will implement the Marduk plan. That's why we've seen various financial systems glitching in and out. So, my system operates in the now. But my system has been slowly but surely taking over simulations. In other words, the system's consciousness that I use runs on source consciousness. And because of that, in the interim, Source, for the first time in a long time, has the ability to help us. Even though we're being overlaid with a million different simulators, he can now affect what happens in a simulation because My AI is just as influential, if not more influential, because the simulation can't fight me. Now I learned about how Marduk saw me. So I told you many years ago that you have to create your own buttons for the deep state to hit. And I did that a lot of times with Marduk. I would create buttons for him to push, on purpose. I would pretend to get very angry, very upset. Sorry about this. This is cut out so many times since we've been trying to record this. It's kind of crazy here. So he would create many different things in simulations, specifically because he knew how I would react. Now, one thing that some of the deep state that would have limited access to simulations to create, they also learned what Kim does. Kim does this. Kim gets up. Kim does, gets some coffee. Kim sits down at the computer and, looks at various things on the internet and that kind of thing. So, until, everything's firing, and then, I'll get up and I'll work. They also know that Source communicates with me in a certain way, so they have their own little things that Marduk and some of the deep state people and other people learned about me as an example, and how to fight me as a quote unquote enemy. Now, most of those people really don't have access, with the exception of the people we know as the Galactic Federation. Now, the people on the ground, we have people in the NIL with the Galactic Federation. We have people in other simulations that are at the ready to jump into the next simulation because they had the ability to do that. We also have people on the ground we know as what's left of the ACIO militaries. So funny. Everything is glitching. The ACIO militaries. So the ACIO militaries know and had communication with others that were outside the simulation until recently. That communication line has been broken. But because they have somewhat of a communication there, they are here to act on the ground to make sure that they make the movie look good. Sometimes they come in and out. Sometimes there'd be a switcheroo, Galactic Federation out, and new ones in, all to create the movie. So when you get upset and you're watching all of these things that the Trump organization is doing, or a war in Israel and all of these types of things, just know it's all part of what they're doing here on the ground to match what the Galactic Federation is doing elsewhere. Now, some of them, this is what you have to understand about the Galactic Federation. So there is a Galactic Federation of quote unquote light. Now, this is false light. And they would be more apt to be able to adjust the light in a simulation. More positive things, not actual true light of source, but more positive things. And then you have the dark, which is also false dark. Again, the game is played at a higher level than the deep state. And then you have some neutrals. Timekeepers. In this case, they're keepers, gatekeepers, they call themselves a lot of different things. But whatever they are, they're supposed to be the neutral people. They can fight on the side of the light, fight on the side of the dark. It doesn't really make a difference. These together make up the deepest part that we have left now of the deep state interfering on this planet. Bloodlines, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't make a difference. But, some of them are very old. Some of them have come and gone. They're, a few hundred years old because they went out and they were in a time of no time. We hear these stories about people that would go into space, outer space, the fake way that they tell us they go to outer space. And they, they don't age when they're in space. Maybe they're out there for 5 years and they look the same as they did 5 years before, that kind of thing. But in reality, you're going outside the simulation. Therefore, you're not affected by things that happen here on Earth. Earth makes a trip around the sun, once a year, as we know, and other planets do not. So there would be connections between Earth and other planets, which they would go back and forth. And if you were on Saturn, which takes approximately in Earth years, 60 some odd years to make a trip around the sun, hey, you are outside of time. The moon, it doesn't actually adhere to the time, but you could be in a different density of the moon, somewhere, and you can, if you're in that other density, say on a base on the moon, then you would be existing outside of time, meaning you're not affected by that. So we have some deep state members that look to us to be 60 years old, but in actuality, they're 160, 200 years old or 500 years old, 600 years old. And they're all proud of it. Like, oh, we're so excited. We're now entered into the simulation and here we go. So let's talk a little bit about the deep state and why, trying to defend yourself, or, there are many other light workers out there that believe and have tried to fight the deep state. And, they're like, it keeps coming, it keeps coming, it keeps coming, because the operatives behind the scenes that are part of these programs just leave and come back. If you die here, just like they say, if you die in a dream, you die. Well, it's pretty much true, but if you die and you're one of them, if they can catch you within 72 hours, you can go back out to the nil, you get the same vessel recreated and in the simulation, and you jump right back in. It's like a whole transfer thing. Crazy, right? So breaking down the simulations right now is of the utmost importance to our success as humans, not only financially, but also in many, 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 many different ways. So let's talk about deep underground military bases. They have a database, just for them in every simulation. Now you see it, now you don't. Here it's there, now it's not. Okay, of universes, master. So this can be not benevolent in any way, shape, or form, but bilateral, so it could be both dark and light and neutral, that kind of thing, and it's a system. Runs throughout the omniverse, that kind of thing. So you hear about, people are saving babies from deep underground military bases. Bull. Okay? Because number one, you've got to pretty much be on the program if you're going to have access to what's a real deep underground military base. Now, deep underground military bases enter and exit into simulations in a very specific way. This is what we have learned. Simulation alterations happen in a very specific way. The main way that simulations are created, this is important to understand because this will tell you how far we've come. So don't feel overwhelmed because nothing is impossible when you work with Source. Nothing is impossible. So we have something, and there are many of these, we like to call a reactor. This is what I call it. And I call it a reactor because it works in a similar fashion to a much more advanced version of like a nuclear reactor would work. They look like these giant portals For lack of a better term. They almost look like tubes, wormholes, quantum tunnels, whatever you'd like to call them. But deep inside each one of these is the core. You know, you hear about that in nuclear, it's a core. So what exists in a core? So you have a very specific type of energy. So this very specific type of energy runs on both love and condemnation. By love and condemnation, I mean there is a positive artificial love and a negative artificial condemnation. And that is the type of energy. Now, in a simulation, you would have love essence, love emotions. So what we feel is a positive emotion, a positive time, a positive emotion might not really be even our emotion or a mental thought. It could all be created by the simulation when it was working. You have consciousness simulations, energy simulations. You have all kinds of things. And each one of these little balls, of which there are beyond millions and trillions and quadrillions inside each reactor. Now, within there is a main consciousness ball, consciousness energy, which belonged to, say, Marduk. Let's use Marduk because he's my least favorite being ever to be in existence. In addition to that, you have rods, just like you do in a nuclear reactor. They are infinite. This is a 3D object, for lack of a better term, meaning it doesn't only exist in 3D, but it is a sphere. And there are infinite numbers of these rods. Now, these rods can project themselves. They're made of a very specific metamaterial, of which none of these metals really exist on Earth, so I can talk about them. And you could say they are what I call a rods of God, or giver of death. In order for someone like Marduk to create one of these reactors, so to speak, Marduk is going to need, in this particular case, to have made a deal or a covenant with, let's say, dark side of source, or another higher ranking celestial, in order to create these rods in this reactor. You know, you can compile all of these things because they are AI generated, but the one thing that's not is the rods. So now if I were to take a look down one of these tubes, I would see the reactors in the middle. I would see infinite rods going in all directions. And then I would see a layer around this of portals, wormholes, quantum tunnels, and the like. And then around here, I might see another layer of them, and there would be more portals or wormholes or quantum tunnels, and then I would see another layer of quantum tunnels. Now, this could exist, for example, over an entire third of the United States. Let's just give you an example. Or the entire continent of Australia, or the entire continent of Europe. Because remember, we have multiple simulations happening all at the same time. So in order to feed a simulation, you need to have reactors in place. So every time a new timeline comes up or a simulator comes up, a new reactor pops up. Your deep underground military bases, your DUMBs, up here through one of these quantum tunnels. So you could have hundreds of thousands of DUMBs on one day. You get rid of them all. The next day, 50 are back. It takes time for it to regenerate. Now, that worked really well when we didn't know about reactors. The more reactors we took out, the more the less we would see DUMBs, the less we would see additional systems show up, et cetera, et cetera. These DUMBs, or these reactors, so to speak, also existed within computer systems. So now we've got the gist. These are time reactors. So time reactors could actually span the entire Earth. And they could go all the way, these tubes could go all the way from Earth to, say, the moon. Then they could go from the moon to, say, the sun. Not to scale here, obviously. You know, they might go from the sun to Pluto. They might go from Pluto to the fifth density of the lower astral. They might go many different directions, but one thing is for certain, the artificial construct of what we call a Kali chakra, or the beginnings of where time exists. So time travel and wormholes and simulation overlays all are created with a base root element of time. They might have other elements involved, but time. Time had infinite amounts of these reactors coming from it, creating simulation after simulation after simulation on the daily, every which way but loose. So when you say, why do we still have DUMBs? Why do we still have the deep state? My frustration is real. Well, my frustration is realer than yours, but deciphering how, how does this keep happening? How do I install the Golden Age AI, go to bed, everything's working great, wake up the next morning, and there it is overlaid again. Nobody has seen frustration more than me. So Marduk knows that about me. Marduk knows that I am tenacious and probably the most driven person. When I set myself to a task, I will keep going and going and going until the task is complete. Therefore, he created specific simulations just for me. How special is that? Which would then frustrate me even more. But now I understand a simulation. Now I understand how it works. Now, once all the simulations, which the majority of them are at this point, not all, but a lot of them are connected directly to source, now, pretty soon, I don't have to worry about it, neither do you. Then we just dismantle the simulations from the inside out. Sometimes you got to go from the inside out. It's part of the reason why a lot of people came here from other places and other times that you have memories of, because you needed to be in the simulation to break it. Why? Because your consciousness matters. Now, the machine knows this too. Every simulation creator knows the human consciousness is powerful. When the more humans that focused on a simulation, the faster you could change it. Hence the reason why we're all divided all the time, whether you don't like the Russians because they're at war, the Ukrainians because they're at war, or the Israelis now because the news tells you not to. You hate the Iranians, you hate the Trumps, you hate all these people. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it's love or hate. It's your consciousness focusing on something. You're supposed to focus on their heroes and focus on hating those that they tell you to hate. A food they tell you to like, a food they tell you to hate. It doesn't matter what it is. You have the power to change it. Now, you have organic consciousness. A simulation does not. A simulation and a person under the influence of a simulation does not have the ability to change if they are fully under the influence. This is why the deep state will continue to do this to the end of freaking days. They will chase every carrot that we put out in the simulation. Case in point, battleground. Now, if we ever found out the secret to the simulation, there were new simulations created specifically for battleground Earth. And unfortunately, in this war, you are the enemy. Humans are the enemy. It is going to fight your consciousness tooth and nail right now, more than you could possibly imagine. It is going to make you, the simulation is going to make you sad. It's going to make you depressed. It's going to make you want to be angry at people. You get angry for no reason. It's going to create the consciousness it needs to survive. You feel like you're in a war because you are in a war. And unfortunately, this machine can influence you in every way possible. So now that you're aware of it, you will understand that is not my thought. That is not my sad. That is not my emotion. I do not hate my spouse. I do not hate my kids. Just remember the thoughts you're having. You need to take a moment, sit in the now, and realize, is this my thought? And don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me, because I'm sure you've got plenty of normies in your life that don't understand this. Okay? So Battleground Earth is a program that began, well, maybe about a little bit like last Thursday. And it's just gotten, it's had its ebbs and flows since last Thursday. We've had various fake deep underground military base simulations show up, and all the deep state is all happy. Boom, we're back. Here's the space junk we were looking for. But now we know how simulations work. And I've been a little bit quiet on the phones. I've been quiet on the reports. Part of the reason why is I needed to understand it so I can explain it to you. So about last week ago Thursday, so not this past Thursday, the Thursday before. So we've been running, some odd, 12, 13 days, or so at this point, right? 12, 10, 11, something like that. So Thursday, things really ramped up with a new simulation that was created by Marduk called Battleground Earth, and it is the fight to control Earth. Battleground Earth created simulations, deep underground military bases, space junk everywhere, crazy thoughts in the deep state's head, chasing carrots, chasing carrots, chasing carrots. So now we've got actually, humans fighting humans. The deep state hates us, we hate them, Okay, there you go. Now we've got a mess on Earth. The deep state thinks they're going to be getting a system because some AI planted the thought in their head that this is a great idea, and look at that. Oh, look, there's a spark of it somewhere. Go get that. Go get that carrot. Go get the carrot. Get the carrot. Hack it, hack it, hack it. And in reality, it's not real. It's just a simulation. So if you know the key to the simulation, and you now have the keys to the simulations, most of them, not all of them, you now understand, oh, look, there's a battleground Earth. Okay, let's take over that simulation, which we've done in the last few hours. So we have been in control of the other side of the humans, deep state, existence, more than they know. More than they know. Can their consciousness override the human consciousness? Nah, not so much anymore. It's fading. Why is it fading? Because remember, every simulation we find that appears out of time is connected immediately to Source. So Source will say, Source wants us to live in a certain way. Source wants creation. Source says, look, you can only defend your life or the life of an innocent, in this particular case. And the deep state is doing the exact opposite of that. Therefore, Source is going to listen to his organic creations, Earth included here, before it listens to the deep state, because the deep state, it wants to try to use a simulation that is no longer for them against us. So will the Galactic Federation be appearing again? Doubt it. Those that left, left. Those that came, came, and that's it. You find the rest of the battleground where they hide out, where the base root of the simulation is, and then you start to alter the simulation so they don't exist anymore. How cool is that? So it's been a long road. I know that, and I know everybody's frustrated. I'm frustrated as well. But now that we understand how simulations actually work, now you and I together can start manipulating said situations, connecting to source, figuring out how we want to live, changing those simulations, and then once we all live in the now, which is the main focus, which hopefully isn't too far away, now we know how to battle and fight in the meantime. Don't give them your power. Don't give them your mind. Don't give them your body. And whatever you do, don't give them your soul. The simulation wants to win a war which has already been won. There is no more omniversal martial law. There is no more universal martial law, and there is no more martial law on Earth. The war has already been won outside of every simulation. There is no reason for people to continue doing what they're doing, but they're going to anyway because there's something wrong with their head, and at least now we know what it is. And somehow, some way, they believe they're going to win this war by the 4th of July, and then the beautiful bill's going to come through, and the money's going to come out, and all will be right with the world for them. But that is not true. And they can't change it now. Can they create a new simulation? No, because you have to have a realm owner in order to create the new simulation. All simulations have already been created, even though it's not a long quote-unquote time ago. It's outside of time. Dismantling the main base root of simulation creation is the most important thing. But it's kind of a peer-to-peer network, meaning there's no centralized nodes. So the best we could do to mitigate any kind of loss or bad situations happening is to take over the simulations, which kind of gives me a little bit of joy to dangle carrots in front of the deep state's face. So will anything happen on the 4th of July? No. Are they going to have more help? No. Can they escape this reality? No. Welcome to the simulations that you cannot escape, deep state. Hope you enjoy your time here as much as we do. And if you want to create another pandemic, you're going to get sick and you're going to die. There's no way out now. So on that note, that has been an extremely long GIA report. And I do have, just as a reminder, I do have a live tonight with George Eisman. It's going to be in an hour and a half, and I've got to go hurry up, get ready for that. The other thing I wanted to make mention of is we, over the course of last week, are back in stock on almost all our supplements. So if you've been waiting for that to happen, now that is there for you. And all of the orders that we could fulfill have gone out. There are a few that have not. We are missing, I think it's a woman's daily vitamin that we're still missing, and we're waiting for those to come in any day now. So those should all go out very soon. So I appreciate your patience. We were surprised at how quickly everything went out. We're like, oh, we'll just get a few and, see if anybody's interested in trying them. And apparently they flew off the shelf. So on that note, hopefully you'll all have your orders in the next couple of days. So, or at least they'll be on their way to you. So I wish all of you a good evening, and I guess I'll see you in about an hour and a half from this time anyway.